Well, hello. Thank you everyone for joining us today for this important discussion. I'm Danielle Casey, the Executive Vice President for the Greater Sacramento Economic Council. We will be starting the formal webinar momentarily, but I'm here to give you a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. Following today's program, we will be sending a post-webinar survey to get feedback that will also include a link to the recording, so stay tuned for that email. For anyone that might have technical issues or general questions, please use the chat function in your Zoom toolbar. But if you have a question for a speaker, we ask that you submit it using the Q&A tool. That'll give us the opportunity to track questions, make sure they're answered, or even follow up post-webinar. We'll work to get everything answered if we can during the conversation today, however. It is now my pleasure to welcome our guest host for today's program, Abby Wortham. Abby is a development manager at Panettone Development Company focused on Northern California markets. Most recently, she was an industrial real estate broker on the Sacramento industrial team at JLL, so she knows all the folks today very well. All of her work draws from a 15-year career in urban industrial infill development, economic development, and public policy. And of course, the inspiration of her two young daughters who are also very present in her life, always and quite literally right now, I hear they are being bribed to stay out of her hair for the next 60 minutes. We're very excited to have her here with us today. So without any further ado, I'd like to kick it over to Abby.
Thank you, Danielle, and thanks for that introduction. I'm certainly excited to be here today to have a dialogue with these experts in commercial real estate and talk about the current state of the industry and the impacts of COVID-19. Without further ado, let me introduce the panel today. We have Todd Eshelman with Newmark Knight Frank, Eric Ortiz from Colliers, Todd Sanfilippo with CBRE, and Dave White with JLL. Okay, panelists, so an easy warm-up question to start. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your work, and a little about what your experience looks like. And we'll start with you, Todd Eshelman. Take it away.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining everybody and the Greater Sacramento Economic Council for putting this on. I have been in Sacramento since 1990. I was in Orange County for a couple of years with now CBRE, Coldwell Banker Commercial back then, doing a training program. I've been really active as predominantly a suburban leasing broker. I do sales, represent buyers, sellers, landlords, and tenants. So pretty broad spectrum, and do a lot of volume. So that's a background.
Yeah, great, thank you. Eric.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining again. I've been in Sacramento since 2002 and been doing real estate since 2006 here in Sacramento with a focus on healthcare ever since. And so quite excited for this panel discussion today and look forward to the questions.
Todd Sanfilippo, you out there?
I am here, so thanks for having me. I began my career in 1989 with CBRE, and I focused my business on all things industrial. Like many in town, I represent landlords and tenants, buyers and sellers. The only requirement is the building's got to have a roll-up door or a dock door on it. I focus primarily on the Sacramento region in Northern California. I've been sheltering in place with my wife and two college-age daughters. It's been going actually quite well, and I'm keeping my sanity by waking up early, putting on a collared shirt and pants, and continuing to work long hours, just trying to keep my old schedule. It is getting a little old, and like everybody, I'm looking forward to getting back to the office. As industrial brokers, we have had a chance to show space probably a little bit more frequently than the other specialties. So like many of my colleagues, we've made plastic surgical gloves, masks, and Clorox wipes part of our business attire, and have a little kit we keep in our car as we carefully tour space and follow the social distancing requirements. But we do get out once in a while, which is nice.
Yeah, Dave?
Oh, I'm not hearing Abby, but that's okay. Hey, I'm Dave White. Thanks for having me. Work at JLL in our downtown Sacramento office. Been in commercial real estate for 16 years. Started with Buzz Oates, and then for the last 14 years, I've specialized solely in retail. So my business partner, John, and I split our time equally between landlord and tenant rep here in the Central Valley. Definitely an interesting time. Don't want to be the little dark rain cloud, but hospitality and retail has been hit the hardest, I think, during this pandemic. So it's been an interesting time, but quarantined here with my wife and 3 little daughters, 7, 4, and 8 months. So if I'm not hiding in my office, spending a lot of time with them afterwards is a really blessing for us to be able to do that. So happy to be here.
Eric? Can Eric hear us, or?
Yeah, I'll jump in for Abby. It looks like her audio is a little bit in and out. So this is
Okay.
Danielle. Yeah, let's grab our last panelist there and then we'll roll into the questions.
I think we already got Eric, so I think I was the last one.
Oh, you were the last one. All right. Well, just to add on,
I'm multitasking. Well, Abby sorts that out if you all like on her behalf. And Abby, I have a great idea. Just move your lips as if you're saying this. But there you go. Perfect. So the next question that we all worked on together was, what are the major topics you are currently working on with your clients to try and solve, whether it's a landlord, tenant, or both type of issue? And are these topics markedly different than they were 6 weeks ago? That might be a leading question. If we could start with Dave and then maybe roll into Todd Eshelman.
Yeah, absolutely. So primarily, we're spending a lot of our time with our agency or landlord clients, just dealing with tenants. So which tenants deserve rent relief or rent abatement, delaying delivery of spaces. Unfortunately, dealing with national tenants or trying to take advantage of our owners and act as if they are their bankers, even though they're well capitalized. That's been a bit of a challenge. Some metrics for the group, which don't paint a pretty picture nationally across our managed retail portfolio, which is for JLL in the tens of millions of square feet. Our April collections were at 32% of what should have been in terms of collections. In May, we're expecting at 15 to 20%. That's across all spectrums of retail. So if you have a Target center or a grocery anchored center, you're markedly higher than that, but some power centers and other smaller centers are collecting near zero, depending on what their tenant mix is. From a tenant perspective, mostly the tenants shut down all expansion and we're focused on triage. And so what's different and changing that we see from the tenant perspective, they're starting to talk about mitigation efforts and reopening, which is a positive sign. And then within our landlord group, we're working closely with our property management side to share best practices of how we are going to reopen retail centers and which tenants are going to reopen and what that looks like to keep, the patrons that come to our shopping centers safe.
So from an office side, first of all, I will say my workplace has been unique and actually quite enjoyable with 2 daughters at home and wife and a black Labrador retriever. So it's been a pleasurable way to work. That said, the workplace, I think we all kind of have come to realize is a bit of a haven. Well, I've got the black lab scratching on the door, trying to get in while I'm doing my thing. Makes things a little bit challenging. So in comparing 6 weeks ago to today and in between, from an office perspective, it's been interesting. We're unable to tour, of course. So we've got landlords that are trying to figure out creative ways to get in front of the tenant community, the brokerage community. You keep marketing as best as you possibly can. There's been, concepts from masks and gloves on tours, the advent of a Matterport camera, which is a very 3D based piece that enables you to feel like you're in the space. I think these kinds of things have opened up the ability for us to see how you can operate without being in the office. That said, in doing sales for as long as we all have, and no matter what you do, I think the further you get away from personal interaction, actually being able to see the whites of somebody's eyes, have them feel the space and the building as you're walking through, even with this great technology, it's significantly more difficult.
Yeah, totally fair. Thank you, Todd. Thanks, Todd. And so next question up, in your opinion, how is our market faring compared to others around the country? I mean, are there any notable trends that may help accelerate our region as we recover? Todd Sanfilippo, we'll toss it to you first.
Well, specific to the industrial market, we're actually faring very well compared to many of the markets in the West. Sacramento is a little more dominated by local and regional tenants versus some of the larger markets throughout California and Oregon and Washington and other Western states. And as a result, those smaller tenants seem to be working through. They're entrepreneurial. They know their businesses will be here in a year, and they're going to keep, working through COVID to find the right space and do what they can to keep their businesses going, which includes some touring. And I think the amount of tours that we're seeing in Sacramento on industrial space is a little bit more active than some of the other competing markets. But we do have a conservative amount of inventory, but small deals or smaller local deals are not the only thing that's active. We are enjoying in Sacramento, even with COVID, some larger deals. There's several build-to-suit deals working right now in Sacramento in excess of 400,000 square feet on a build-to-suit basis. And there's 8 to 10 requirements that are surveying the market for spaces 50,000 square feet to 100,000 square feet in size. And I think that, the tenants that have been picking up their pursuits of recently new lease space and owner-occupied properties, we're seeing offers from owner users, which is also a good sign. Rents and values are stable. We've not seen a step back on purchase prices, base rents, or even land prices. Although when it comes to putting a transaction together, there's a little bit more leniency by landlords in the form of free rent or upfront concessions to kind of get a tenant through the next several months in exchange for a new 5-year term. And as far as escrows are concerned, those that are in escrow or heading into escrow, again, are, making deals at pre-COVID pricing and values for the most part. But what is different is the length of the escrow period. We are seeing buyers ask and sellers agree to a slightly longer physical due diligence period or a slightly extended contingency for financing. But overall, Sacramento is doing okay on the industrial front.
Thanks, Todd. So with that okay kind of thumbs up for industrial for the moment, Eric, what's happening over on healthcare side?
So I'm going to piggyback on Todd and give healthcare a thumbs up as well. I think the future for healthcare is bright, largely attributed to population growth. And I'm speaking for Sacramento and also just the nation as a whole. Pre-COVID-19, healthcare has been on a steady incline. There's been growth in all factors of healthcare. Employment has seen growth. Real estate demand has seen growth because of that. Pricing for healthcare real estate related assets has increased to record highs pre-COVID-19. So I think the future and the long-term outlook for healthcare, I think will continue to be a low risk asset class on the investment front and from the healthcare side. There will be some short-term repercussions. If I were to highlight one area of concern, I would attribute it closely and compare it to the retail side, and that is independent physicians. Independent physicians have seen, one study recently, up until last week, a 50% drop in visits from patients and consumers. Over the next several months, we will see a fallout from them. Don't know how significant. There is a large portion of physicians that are close to retirement, but have been hanging on because they love and they're passionate about what they do. But this could be an impetus for them to kind of maybe hang up their jacket and move on and not live through another recovery. So we are looking closely at that, and that will impact real estate in the near term. We could see vacancies go up for some of the smaller clinic type spaces, 2,000 to 5,000 square feet, primarily from the independent physicians. So in the short term, healthcare is not insulated from COVID-19 implications, but long term, I firmly believe that healthcare is in a good position.
Got it. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Todd Eshelman, anything you would add in on the office front?
Yes, the healthcare industry has been by far on the private sector side the most prevalent user that has driven much of the deal activity over the past decade. Right now, we're marketing 240 acres out in Folsom, about 2 mile stretch of freeway visible land there, as the city annexed about 3,600 acres. And the majority of all that activity, we've been working on it for 2.5 years now, has been driven by the healthcare industry. We're about ready to make an announcement for a 30-acre acquisition and a big campus there, and then we have several others. So yeah, healthcare, and then I'd also say the Centene transaction was as good an endorsement as to where Sacramento sits from an attractiveness standpoint, where Centene HealthNet, which was headquartered down in Woodland Hills, is bringing up, and Barry can speak to this more, but effectively bringing up their regional headquarters, and is about ready to complete construction on their first 2 buildings of a 1.2 or 3 million square foot campus. That's a massive endorsement to the region from a healthcare perspective.
Yeah, certainly. And if anyone has been out and about driving, you can see how that's coming right along out there for sure. So with this and just really so many webinars and calls maybe we've all been on, as an example, the pandemic has really accelerated the digital transformation for many people in the workforce. As we shelter in place, many are unable to go to our place of work, shop at stores, the bars and restaurants with their pause. What digital transformation impacts do you all think will stick with us following this outbreak? And how do you see that shifting the companies that you work with, their space needs? Dave, let's start with you first on the retail side.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see some tenants who were already moving towards this type of platform, although they weren't doing it thinking about a pandemic. So anyone who is already set up, specifically on the non-food and beverage side, but retail side with omni-channel services. So that would be like a Target order ahead and pick up, in the parking lot, or Nordstrom, where you can order and they'll ship it to you within a day, or you can pick it up at the door. So anyone who had that kind of omni-channel presence, you saw Amazon buy Whole Foods. So that was a way to gain a foothold of brick and mortar stores throughout the US. So we will see a move and a shift of retailers who already had that. They're going to lean into that harder. And then those who have not had that are struggling in a big way. And so a lot of the phase 2 in California specifically that we're going to is allowing non-essential retailers to open, but they can't necessarily let a lot of people in their stores. So having that order ahead or pre-order ability is big. And I think that we're going to see that continue. Food and beverage in the drive-through and kind of the to-go pizza guys, they're maintaining their sales more or less. They've had to adapt and change, but I think we're going to see a move towards the drive-through component. So some fast casual restaurants that historically have not had that, i.e. Chipotle and some of the, make your own pizza guys, things like that, they may move towards a drive-through format just to insulate themselves from something like this. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of chatter about a retail apocalypse. We don't believe that's true. And some metrics to kind of detail that is right now, 19% of sales are done online in the US. That will change by about 2% based on the COVID pandemic. So we're going to go to about 21%. It's not going to go to 50%. It's not, we're not going to see entire shopping centers just go away. But I think that you're going to see, as we talked about before, more push to kind of having that multi-channel or omni-channel presence. And then space needs in the restaurant industry, I think it's going to be really interesting. When they reopen here in California, they're going to be opening at 50% capacity due to, keeping space between everyone. So long term, it'll be interesting to see what that does. But there's going to be a focus there on to-go, order ahead, and then contactless payments as well, I think, in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been utilizing some of the to-go functions to supplement the cooking at home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Todd Eshelman, anything you'd add to that? Sort of how does this digital transformation impact our go forward?
Well, I think this whole event that we're doing right now is a great example of it. We've got so much reach with just the Zoom tool and similar applications that enable you to while you're not touching and feeling and seeing each other physically, you can get that sense of a connection. And I think what's going to occur is that you're going to have a lot of executives review their space and needs coming out of all this, and saying, one, how much office space do we really need, and how well did we function? This is a fabulous case study, forced case study for how you can be productive without actually being physically in the office. And then secondly, I think, we've been getting more and more dense from a square foot per person ratio. When I started in the business 30 years ago, you built an office building, it was just automatic, 250 feet per person or 4 per thousand ratio. As the office model has changed to a more open floor plate and a more collaborative environment with less private offices, those densities have gone significantly smaller square foot per person. So you're down, a standard office deal in Sacramento, particularly in the suburban market, is no longer a 4 per thousand parking ratio or 250 feet per person. It's gotten down to 5 per thousand, 6 per thousand, or even 7 per thousand. At one point, just like kids in a classroom, you can only cram so many people together and before you start losing productivity. And that has definitely started to occur once you get in that 150 square foot per person ratio. You just get distracted a lot, no matter how many breakout rooms you put together. So I think this COVID-19 situation is going to have two major impacts. One, the look of how much we can work away from the office, and two, how much we're going to need to go back to a larger square foot per person ratio, from maybe 250 to, I saw 300 feet per person ratio out of one of our San Francisco pieces just a couple days ago. I wouldn't be surprised now from social distancing. So a lot to be seen, but those are major implications.
Great, thanks for that. Moving on to the next question, a major focus for this whole outbreak has been the capacity of our healthcare system, right? We've heard a lot about that in all its different ways. So Eric, I'll toss this to you first with your healthcare focus, but what's been the sentiment of the local systems regarding their facility planning and space needs going forward, given what we've been experiencing now?
Well, I like to say that the Sacramento healthcare systems largely dominated by large systems like UC Davis, Dignity Health, Sutter, and Kaiser, with financially sound and significant investment in their facilities. I'd like to say that Sacramento systems met the challenge of COVID face on. And I think they were quite successful, and I witnessed it firsthand. Actually, I was not long ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, was at a property down the street from a hospital here in Sacramento to meet with healthcare hospital executives, and only 3 minutes prior to our appointment at the property, get a call from them saying they can't make it. There's been a surge in the last hour of 20 plus new patients entering the hospital, and they're all hands are on deck, and they need to convert non-ICU rooms into ICU facilities. So I think there's been a tremendous impact in Sacramento. I believe we fared well compared to other markets as far as cases go, and I think the systems did a really good job meeting that challenge face on. The non-real estate part of that equation is, of course, the equipment. And I think, the ventilators and getting proper protection to the nurses and all, I think based on what I've seen, I think the systems have done really well. And, all of this, from the facility standpoint, it is changing the thought process, and it has been changing. Over the last, I'd say, half decade, there's been a transition from primary care visits to telemedicine. And as video conferencing is catching on, it was a slow growth and a slow transition, but I think COVID has put a spotlight on healthcare. And I think overnight, telemedicine, where you visit your doctor over video for minor ailments, has caught on overnight. And I think that's going to have immediate impact on the healthcare industry. And it will change the way you use healthcare facilities. Now, do you open up a clinic that's 3,000 square feet, and a common ratio is for one physician, you have 3 exam rooms. So if you've got, maybe you don't need 3 exam rooms anymore that all require plumbing and heavy TI costs, tenant improvement costs, to build a clinic, a primary care clinic, you're looking at spending upward close to $200 a square foot just in the interior improvements these days. Compared to office, you're closer to $50 to $75 a square foot. So there's, I think, a benefit to this in telemedicine. Everybody's looking at lowering real estate costs and not needing to visit the actual primary care clinic. And I think COVID-19 has really accelerated that transition for better or for worse.
Yeah, fair, and absolutely worth acknowledging, while that's not the major topic today, but just the tremendous amount of efforts that our healthcare system has put forward, and the practitioners and what they've done in this time is really phenomenal to watch. Dave, anything you would add on the real estate side and sort of kind of how this plays into retail spaces?
Yeah, I think, just quickly, it's been a shift that we've seen prior to this, that, the Sutters and others of the world have started to do their walk-in clinics or urgent care clinics. I think that's accelerated over the last 2 years. And as a result of this, we've seen them push a little bit harder, and actually have seen some new users talking about coming to the Sacramento Valley just in the last 2 weeks. So from a, transactional perspective for us, it's been great to see that happening. And I think the healthcare industry is looking at trying to get, closer to the communities and spread out a little bit, so that we don't have to cram everyone into an emergency room or a on-site urgent care facility like at a Sutter. If you have 5 or 6 clinics throughout the community, you can have, less density, less people visiting, and then take care of those smaller, quicker needs versus having them come into the hospital. So we see that as a continuing factor for sure, and in going forward from this.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that interplays with some of the retail stuff you've already been talking about in this session and those shifts. Yeah. So a couple more questions. Prior to this shutdown, we as a region in Greater Sacramento had really been experiencing a steady migration of Bay Area residents as well as companies relocating or coming into our market. Where do you think that trend is headed as we come out of this COVID-19 experience? Todd Sanfilippo, we'll start with you and then we'll punt it back over to Todd Eshelman.
Right, thanks, Abby. Well, specific to the industrial, I'm highly confident that that trend will continue. We had very strong interest from large national fulfillment and distribution business lines pre-COVID. That's continued, through the pandemic, maybe slowed a little bit, but continued to make forward strides on most of the deals that were active. And also our affordability compared to the Bay Area is not expected to change as a result of COVID. There's, all the reasons that an industrial tenant will come to Sacramento are some of the same reasons that any other business line would relocate to Sacramento. And one thing to keep in mind specific to industrial is labor is one of the most critical components of an industrial user's decision to locate to a specific region. Base rent is really a small component of an industrial tenant's total occupancy cost. And Sacramento's labor rates are among the lowest for any large market in California. And that's not lost on Northern California for us either. And you look at our logistics as well, we're second to none given the fact that we enjoy the intersection of Interstate 80 and I-5 located just north of downtown Sacramento, which gives us immediate access to Canada, Mexico, the West Coast, and the East Coast. So, for those reasons and many more that are similar to why office and technology companies will come to Sacramento, I do see a continued migration from the Bay Area into Sacramento.
Todd Eshelman, anything you'd add there or?
Well,
change?
yes. I mean, if anything, I think we'll see an acceleration from Bay Area to Sacramento. There's already been a significant run of migration. I think it's the #1 destination for those that migrate out of the San Francisco Bay Area, maybe by a long shot, coming into the Valley in Sacramento. Again, I mean, I got here in 1990. The foothills largely were not populated. The area that I live right now is off of Highway 50 heading towards South Lake Tahoe. And it's in El Dorado Hills. And we've got, the Serrano Country Club on the 50 side. There's Granite Bay and all those communities that surround that. Cata Madera, all these places literally did not exist in the mid-late 90s, and have been a catalyst for a lot of Bay Area migration. The value proposition is just too great. And then you couple that with what's been done downtown, and Mark Friedman, I know, is on this call, and I just can't say enough for, I sit on the 25th floor right now in 989th Street, right in the urban core. I was never would have thought I'd come down here. And the experience that has been offered for just the urban environment with the Sacramento Kings new arena. I can look out and see where Major League Soccer is coming. Virtually all of the West Sacramento riverfront has got infrastructure in place with riverfront views. Mark, I know you're doing a hotel and mixed use project there. It's just everywhere you look, this entire city from foothills to urban core is a much more attractive proposition to Bay Area residents and employers.
Great. Thank you, Todd and Todd. Let's talk a little bit about physical spaces. What changes do you think we can expect to find in the way we interact with buildings, obviously once the shutdown orders have been lifted, both in the short term, and how do you see that happening, those building interactions happening in the long term? Eric, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'll say, the obvious parts of this, and when you interact with buildings, are touching parts of the building. You open the door with your hands, you open the elevator, you push the button with your finger. The kitchen areas. I see all of that changing. A lot of it could be automated. It could be motion sensor to improve the social distancing and the interactions with others, especially in the short term. I could see that happening on the healthcare front as well. It's similar to the office buildings. I could see big changes there. And in the waiting room. In the waiting room is often feared by those who need to see a doctor, but might not want to be in that environment for, maybe they feel like they can get other illnesses by being in a tight room with other people who are experiencing illness. I can see waiting rooms enlarging, and I can see seating being spread out more, just like you might see in a regular office setting as well, where, cubes aren't, maybe they're not 4 feet from each other. Maybe they turn out to be 6 to 10 feet or 12 feet from each other. So I think there will be a big change in facilities. I would not be surprised if companies, industrial, office, and retail, movie theaters, office buildings partner with health systems who may have the experience to provide guidelines, to provide the gloves and the protection. And I could see a partnership where, maybe there's a Dignity Insider partner with certain developers and whatnot, and maybe post guidelines in common areas to help promote social distancing and a wherewithal. Yeah.
Dave White, I'll put it over to you. Anything you see on the retail side, kind of how we'll interact with our physical spaces differently?
Yeah, we're obviously radically changing the way that we interact with the physical buildings in this kind of short term. So my guess is that we're going to see short and midterm impacts, but long term is going to be more specific to the type. So short term, how do you enter the building with social distancing, queuing people outside 6 feet apart, only letting a certain number of people through the building at a time, one-way aisles, when restaurants reopen, spacing tables, things like that. Two sectors that are really going to struggle, and depending on how we open in California, are theaters and gyms, with as dense and as close together as people are in those. I think you've seen a trend in theaters to move to reserved seating, which is going to be a big win for those that reopen and are able to say, sell only, part group seats and have 2 or 3 seats in between each party to kind of create that spacing. But I think with, as you've all seen, streaming services and movies going straight to streaming, it'll be interesting to see what the long-term impact is. Long-term, I think a lot of it's going to have to do with whether or not this is a pervasive issue for us. Not to play doctor, but it seems like the death rate is significantly lower than originally expected. So I think once there's a handle on what this is and how it spreads, and if there's any sort of treatments or vaccines for it, my guess is long-term we kind of get back to normal. I think that some retailers may not emerge from this, but unlike the office density shrinking, we haven't seen like a densifying in retail necessarily. Retailers have gotten smaller, but they're just merchandising better. So I think they'll, just because they're going to go to kind of an omni-channel, selling online and in store, but I don't see like major changes long-term personally.
Okay, great. Thanks for those comments. All right, last big question. It's the crystal ball time, as I like to call it. As we look ahead to this time next year, what are your predictions on what our market will look like? How do you think we'll be impacted in terms of rent, vacancy, construction activity, capital markets? And you don't have to answer all of those, and we've already touched on some of these, so maybe pick a new flavor that you haven't spoken to yet. And then to close it out too with that, what makes you optimistic about our region's future? I'm going to go the same order we started with. Todd Eshelman, kick it off for us.
I'm by nature a glass half full guy, and sometimes get tagged with being a little too glass half full, but that's just okay. I'd rather see the world that way. I can tell you from an office perspective, this market is in probably the best position that it's ever been in the 30 years that I've been here. The lowest vacancy rate that we ever had was broad market, all product types from Class A to Class C. It was about 8.9%, and that was in 2000. But at that time, we were also in the midst of building a lot of office space speculatively. So from about 1997 to 2007, we built about 1.5 million to 2 million square feet average. Our average vacancy rate was 12%. So this, because of what happened in 2008 and the contraction level that we had, and the valuation drops and the rental rate drops, we just could not pencil to build any more office space. So today we sit at a broad vacancy of about 10%. We are generally starting to build office space in this market speculatively, if you look at the history books, at around a 12% vacancy rate. So, and we build about an average of 1.5 million to 2 million square feet per year on average, on a 10-year look back on the last upcycle. So our market is, we have no new deliveries, right? So you're not putting any new supply into a logical down cycle. And how long this lasts from COVID-19, we don't know. But prior cycles, we've also filled many of those office buildings that we built speculatively with housing related tenants. We had big housing booms. That's not the case this time. It's been very measured, very consistent and diverse growth across a lot of different sectors. Of course, we've got government and healthcare that are underlying employment insulators. And then we're going to have, for example, UC Davis building Aggie Square, which is a 2 million square foot monster expansion of their campus right outside the urban core. That's going to bring in an incredible amount of life sciences, R&D, really a major revitalization of this region from that food group of employment, high paying jobs and educated jobs. So there's really not much downside to this environment as far as I'm concerned, outside of the ramifications that we're going to see from probably some of the smaller employers, and there'll be some setback, but we can afford it.
Great, thanks for those thoughts. Eric?
Yeah, so I think in the short term, I think there will be some bumps in the road for healthcare. Like I said earlier, on the independent physician side, typically they're in lower cost medical office buildings, Class C plus B. I could see some impact on that, and vacancies go up and rents come down slightly. I think it'll be short term. I think that could happen, will happen maybe 12, 18 months. Part of the economic impact in the shutdown was the cancellations or the stop of elective procedures. That's a significant revenue stream for independent physicians and healthcare systems as well. And it will take time for systems and doctors to recover from that lost income. So, their space and their overhead costs will be reduced to meet that. Sorry, got a little furry friend there. So, and then the capital market side, there has been Probably the same for all sectors, office, retail, industrial, maybe not so much industrial, but the capital market side, the debt market, has seen tremendous demand up until the onset of the pandemic. And the debt markets for even medical real estate, which has been steady, low risk, has essentially frozen over. We do see that kind of thawing out over the next 30 to 60 days. And it's really hard to get a loan right now for outpatient, off-campus medical investments right now. The long term, though, I think it's going to recover, and I think it will recover close to back to normal. It will look a little different, but I think the long-term outlook for healthcare real estate from investors and occupiers will remain strong. And Sacramento is going to fare well. If you look at the population segment that really puts pressure on healthcare system are the baby boomers. And because Sacramento is an affordable place to retire, we do have a large population of baby boomers, and they will continue to put demand on Sacramento healthcare systems and real estate. So I think the long-term outlook is good for all real estate.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Todd Sanfilippo, any thoughts on the look ahead?
Yeah, specific to Sacramento and industrial properties, I think that, looking towards this time next year, I think we actually are going to exceed what we would have forecasted pre-COVID for the Sacramento region. And I think we probably mirror most large industrial markets throughout the country. What COVID did was it exposed weaknesses within existing e-commerce platforms. And for those businesses that were just getting started with their e-commerce platform or didn't have one at all, or had one that really wasn't working too well to begin with, they've realized the critical importance of having a solid functioning platform. And so it's going to be a priority for most distribution business lines. And I read an article that talked about the fact that when Steve Jobs invented the iPhone and brought it to the market for the first time, it socialized our population by 3 to 5 years in advance of what it would have been from, a technology awareness. And I think that COVID is going to do that for e-commerce platforms. I think companies are going to push themselves 3 to 5 years quicker to the forefront than they would have naturally. And I think part of that will also include more mechanized and roboticized buildings. And we'll certainly see those in Sacramento. Many people, I think, understand that the Amazon fulfillment center that's out at the Metro Air Park, you drive by it, it appears like a traditional big box distribution warehouse, but it's a building inside of a building. There's 4 stories inside of that building with a lot of mechanization. And, that will be the future of Sacramento's distribution warehouse market as well, in my opinion. And I think as far as, rents are concerned, I think for new state-of-the-art buildings, we'll see rents slowly climb. They need to due to the cost of construction, but tenants will pay the premium to get the most efficient state-of-the-art buildings that will give them the best ability to serve them and their constituents out there. Vacancy rates will probably stay fairly stable. We're at 4% now. We typically will build speculative on a historical basis once we hit 7% or 6.5%. We started seeing spec development happen at about 5% this time around. And at 4%, we have some speculative construction with more on the way. But I think with the new construction that's planned, that will be brought to the market, and the backfilling of that space, 4% will probably stay fairly stable, which is good. Regarding our capital markets, I'm not quite sure where that ultimately is headed. But I do know that, industrial property was one of the darlings of the capital markets environment. It'll continue to be a sought after product type. And so I think that, money for industrial property, if it's going to be allocated, will be allocated, to industrial with some velocity, just because of just the demand and momentum that e-commerce, food, beverage, and medical distribution business lines have. And again, I think, the future is bright for Sacramento on a larger distribution warehouse scale. Regarding our local mom and pop tenants, as we like to call them, tenants that are leasing spaces that are 5,000 square feet and smaller, I think they will be okay. I think, they're got a little bit of a bumpy road ahead of them. Those that, have some capital will make it through this. Others may not. But again, Sacramento is such an entrepreneurial market that we will recover from that. And, that smaller tenant market, might recover 6 months after, the big box distribution comes to the forefront. But again, overall, I think, things are bright for Sacramento's industrial market. And again, COVID is going to bring some accelerated distribution businesses to Sacramento.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for that summary. And Dave, what about retail? What's your crystal ball?
I'm glad that Mark is going to close this out because I don't want to end on a sour note. It's going to be a really tough road, and a lot of that is going to depend heavily on how quickly we can emerge and what retail looks like, what consumer behavior looks like, and how long it takes to get there. A lot of, specifically in the food and beverage industry, they kind of live hand to mouth. They're cash flow businesses, and being down for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months is really going to significantly impact them. California Restaurant Association metric is up to 30% of restaurants in California will close for good. I hope that's not the case. Most people who own and run and have a passion for cooking or operating restaurants can't think of doing anything else. So although it may be a really tough road, our hope is that their owners and the lenders of those owners will work with them to try to keep them open. We don't want more vacancy coming out of this, although we're going to see significant vacancy coming out of this. As we alluded to before, theaters as a sector is going to be heavily impacted. We've already seen a national bankruptcy or two coming. Gyms have historically, in the last 6 or 7 years, taken a lot of the box spaces that were kind of unwanted by retailers. So we really hope that they'll be able to get back to normal. But again, they're heavily dependent on a monthly cash flow coming in. So unfortunately, it's going to be a pretty rocky road for us over the next year. And the real question is going to be when we come out of this, are there going to be tenants to backfill? I think some bright spots are going to be, it's going to create opportunities for those tenants that are well capitalized and want to be in this market. We've, in the A+ and B+ centers, have had extremely low vacancy rates for a good space. So if those do come available, we expect that there is going to be demand for those. And, Eric alluded to this a little bit in the capital markets, but there will be some distressed assets that come through, and hotels and retail are going to be the primary driver of that. And there's an absolute massive amount of capital poised, ready for that. So even though current not be able to survive the downturn in retail rents, we expect that there's going to be a lot of distressed asset buyers that pick those properties up, and hopefully they put some money into them because they have a better basis, and reformat them and bring them into the new format of retail going forward. So, I hope it turns out, but it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy road here going forward.
Can I just add one thing before we go to Mark? This is Barry Broom. I'm the president and CEO of Greater Sacramento. Thanks for everybody coming on. The other thing that we're missing is, we've been working with these small tech companies the last 5 years. We've had like 30 or 40 of them come into the market. They're all operating on equity. They're hiring right now. So one of the things that is really important is we have 52 fintech companies here with about 8,800 jobs. They're hiring and growing right now. Obviously, that's our version of a digital base. And then to move on Aggie Square, there's still 28 companies with letters of intents, and it plans to break ground in November on a $1 billion project. So a lot of the things we've been working on locally, MLS is still happening, Kaiser's still happening. We still anticipate the spec buildings that are planned to go forward. So the other really good news about our region is not only is the region coming out of this better positioned, because I think these big metro markets are going to have some hit on them from a location standpoint after this, but also because we've been working on things like the California Mobility Center. We've been moving towards the future to insulate us from a government correction. And now that momentum will help us on this pandemic. And so I think the actual industry profile of the community has been dramatically improving in the last 3 to 5 years. And that's going to help us tell a different story. So I did want to just contribute that to the panel. So I thank you for allowing me to interrupt.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. And thank you to all of you for your comments. And at this point, to close us out for today, it's my honor to introduce Mark Friedman, founder and president of Fulcrum Property, and will be sharing some final remarks with us today. Mark Friedman is the founder and president of Fulcrum Property. The Fulcrum team delivers architecturally distinctive projects that influence the way people work, play, and live. He's an active participant in charitable and civic organizations, including service on the board of Greater Sacramento Economic Council, and he was the Metro Chamber's 2015 Sacramentan of the Year. Thank you for joining us, Mark. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you to all the members of the panel for such candid and thoughtful insights today. There were a couple of things that struck me about the panelists' comments. The first is that I never would have imagined 8 weeks ago discussing any of the things that we've discussed today. The world literally changed in an instant, and I think that all of us were caught off guard. And it doesn't matter how well situated your business was, unless you're Jeff Bezos or Zoom or Netflix, we're all going to take a hit. And that is certainly true of parts of my business. So while our residential portfolio has held up really well, and many of our office tenants are considered to be essential services, as Dave has indicated, the retail sector has been hit really hard. Restaurants, gyms, movie theaters, and any kind of place that people gather are going to find it very, very difficult in the near term to restructure their business and to reopen. And the irony in all of this is that, many of us in the retail business have been pursuing a strategy for the last 4 or 5 years of trying to create experiential retail, places where people come together, because that's what bricks and mortar could offer that online retailing experiences can't. And unfortunately, it's precisely those kinds of experiences that we cannot have right now. Another comment that you heard from the panelists today that struck me is that the virus is accelerating changes that were already underway. As Eric indicated, the move to telemedicine and the ability to work from home are just 2 of those examples. And I agree that we're going to see in the next 12 to 24 months 4 to 5 years worth of evolution in that direction. And I'm also seeing something else that many of you have noticed, which is that the virus seems to affect businesses in just the way it affects people. If you're otherwise healthy, you're probably okay. But if there's an underlying condition, if you've got some fundamental weakness, you're much more likely to get sick and maybe even die. And unfortunately, that's one of the factors that's affecting the retail industry and many of the formats like department stores, who have been struggling for many years to figure out how to compete effectively with online retailing. I think the last point that I'd like to just highlight that I took from your comments today is that this crisis is completely different from any other that we've faced in our lifetimes. It's not like the downturn in 2008, where there were excesses in one part of the economy. In that case, it was mortgage-backed securities that dragged down everything else. It's not like a war, which has a heavy toll on people's lives, but tends to stimulate economies. It's really most like a natural disaster. Nobody expected it, nobody caused it. There's not enough insurance to go around, and everybody's going to get hurt. And it's a test of character that is going to bring out the best in some people, and unfortunately, the worst in others. And I think that framing, that nobody caused it, and everybody, is going to feel the effects is important to me, because, if you accept that no one's to blame for this circumstance, then you can eliminate a lot of the finger pointing that gets in the way of solving problems. And if you recognize that, everybody's going to take a hit, somehow, no matter how well prepared you are, or how well capitalized, then I think it's a lot easier to kind of see that, we're all in this together. And the only way to get out of it is, to help each other and to work together and to do what we can to, preserve the things about this community that make us love living here. So, in closing, I know that we've got a long road ahead of us, and it's not clear to anybody, how or when this is going to end, but it will end, and we will make it through. I promise you that. So I'd like to just close by, thanking Danielle again, Barry, and the entire GSAC team for hosting this event. And thanks to all of you for participating. Stay safe and wash your hands.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.